The creature found them faster than either of them had hoped. Yuna heard it first, a heavy scraping sound followed by that terrible clicking that had haunted their journey through the caves. And when she looked toward the outpost entrance, she saw something that nearly stopped her heart. It was massive, easily 3 meters tall, even while hunched over to fit through the doorway, with pale eyeless flesh stretched over a body that seemed designed for nothing except killing and tendrils. Covered its head like a crown of nightmares that twitched and swayed as they read the air for sounds and heat. The emitter. Saris shouted from their position near the control panel. I need 30 more seconds. Yuna did not have 30 seconds. She drew her sidearm and fired, not expecting to kill the creature, but hoping to distract it, and the energy bolt struck its shoulder and produced a screech of rage that echoed through the outpost like a physical force. The creature charged. Yuna dove to the side, and the space where she had been standing a moment before was torn apart by claws that could have shredded metal, as she rolled to her feet and fired again and again while backing toward Saris. 20 seconds. Saris called out. The creature was learning. It anticipated her movements now, and one massive limb swept toward her in an arc she could not fully avoid, and the impact sent her flying across the room to slam against a wall with enough force to crack the stone behind her. Pain exploded through her body, but she forced herself to stand because giving up meant dying, and dying meant Saris would die too, and that was simply not acceptable. 10 seconds. The creature loomed over her, and those terrible tendrils reached toward her face, and Yuna knew she had no more tricks left, and no more dodges, and no more time. Then the sonic emitter activated. The sound it produced was beyond human hearing, but the effect was immediate and devastating. The creature recoiled as if struck by lightning, and its screech of pain was so loud that Yuna felt her eardrums nearly burst from the pressure. It fled, stumbling and crashing through the outpost corridors. It retreated from the sonic assault with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, and within seconds it had vanished back into the darkness of the caves. Yuna collapsed to her knees, and her whole body was shaking, and her oxygen alarm was beeping insistently to remind her that she had less than 90 minutes of breathable air remaining. It worked, Saris said, and there was wonder in their voice. It actually worked. How long will it stay away? I do not know. The system was not designed for sustained use, and according to these readings, the power reserves are nearly depleted. Yuna forced herself back to her feet and limped toward the control panel where Saris was working, and what she saw on the displays made her stomach drop. The emitter is overheating, she said. If we keep it running, it will destroy the entire outpost. Yes. And if we turn it off, the creature will come back. Yes. They looked at each other across the flickering console, and both of them understood what the situation demanded. But neither wanted to be the first to say it. There is a passage behind this chamber, Saris finally said. It leads upward toward a cave mouth on the eastern side of the cliffs. You might be able to reach it before your oxygen runs out. If you leave now, I am not leaving you. Yuna. No. Yuna said, and the word came out harder than she intended, but she did not take it back. I told you before, we do not leave people behind, and I meant it. Then we both die here, because I cannot walk and you cannot carry me fast enough, and the mathematics simply do not allow for any other outcome. Yuna looked at the overheating emitter and then at the passage Saris had described, and then at the alien who had become something like a friend during their desperate journey through the darkness. The mathematics are wrong, she said. She crossed to Saris and lifted them onto her back in a carry position that her instructors had taught her years ago for extracting wounded soldiers from combat zones, and the alien was lighter than she expected, but the weight still sent pain shooting through her injured ribs. What are you doing? Setting the emitter to overload, Yuna said as she keyed in commands with one hand while holding Saris with the other. When it blows, it will collapse this entire section of the cave system. The creature will be buried. and we will be on the other side of the rubble. The timing would have to be perfect? Then I will be perfect. She did not wait for Cerise to argue. She simply started running. The passage was narrow and steep, and every step sent agony through her body, but she did not stop, and she did not slow down because stopping meant dying, and she had not come this far to fail now. Behind them, the emitter screamed as it built toward overload, and the creature, drawn by the fading sonic field, had begun to return, and Yuna could hear its clicking growing louder. With every passing second, 50 meters to go, her lungs burned and her vision blurred, and the oxygen alarm in her helmet changed from beeping to a steady tone that meant she was approaching the absolute limit of her air supply, 30 meters. The walls around them began to shake as the emitter reached critical mass, and Yuna heard stone cracking somewhere behind her, and she pushed harder than she had ever pushed before. 10 meters. The explosion hit like a physical force, a wave of pressure and sound and debris that threw them both forward through the passage mouth and into blinding daylight that made Yuna cry out in shock after so long in the darkness. They tumbled down a rocky slope and came to rest in a heap at the bottom, and the cave behind them collapsed in a thunder of falling stone that sealed the passage forever. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Cerise spoke in a voice filled with something Yuna had never heard from them before, something that sounded almost like joy. "We are alive. We are alive." Yuna agreed, and she would have laughed if she had the energy. The storm had passed while they were underground, and the sky above them was clear and blue and dotted with unfamiliar stars that were just beginning to appear in the fading light of sunset. "Sergeant Park." The voice came from somewhere above them, and Yuna looked up to see Felix and Mora scrambling down the slope toward them with a rescue team close behind. "You are alive," Mora said, and the drone's empathic senses were clearly overwhelmed by the emotions pouring off both survivors. "We have been searching for you since the storm ended. Your beacon was so faint we almost missed it. I found a friend," Yuna said simply. Mora and Felix meet Cerise of the Vanthi. The shocked silence that followed was almost funny, and Yuna watched as her colleagues processed the impossible truth of what they were seeing. A member of a species that should have been extinct for 3 centuries lying beside their human teammate like it was the most natural thing in the world. "The Vanthi are not extinct," Felix finally said, and his clicking had taken on a tangent of pure scientific excitement. "This changes everything we thought we knew about galactic history. There is much to discuss," Cerise agreed. "But first, I believe I would like to see the sky properly for the first time in my life." Yuna helped them sit up, and together they watched as the stars came out one by one above a world that had been their prison and was now perhaps something else entirely. "What happens now?" Ceres asked quietly. "I have no people left, no home, no place in a galaxy that believed we were monsters and then believed we were ghosts." Yuna put her hand on the alien's shoulder and smiled. "Now you come with me," she said. "The Concord is going to have a lot of questions, but they are also going to learn that the Vanthi are not monsters and never were your ancestors made mistakes, but you are not your ancestors. And if they do not accept me, then they will have to go through me first," Yuna said. "And I promise you that is not an easy thing to do." Cerise made a sound that Yuna had learned to recognize as Vanthi laughter. "I believe you," they said. "I have seen proof." The rescue shuttle descended toward them, and as Yuna helped Cerise toward it, she thought about the woman who had found her in the forest so many years ago and wondered if she had ever known how much that simple act of kindness had meant. Probably not. That was the thing about humans. They did not help others because they expected gratitude or recognition or reward. They helped because helping was simply what you did when someone needed you. And now, because of that impulse, that strange, irrational, beautiful human instinct, a species that had been lost to history for 300 years, had a chance at a future again. Cerise looked up at the stars, and then at Una, and asked a question that she had clearly been thinking about for some time. What do you call someone who refuses to give up on another person, even when all logic says they should? Una grinned. Some people call it stubborn, and some people call it stupid. She helped Cerise onto the shuttle and followed them inside, and the hatch closed behind them on one chapter of their story while another was just beginning. We just call it human. The outpost revealed itself gradually as they rounded a final corner, first as faint reflections from Una's helmet lamp, bouncing off metal surfaces, and then as the unmistakable shapes of constructed walls and doorways carved into the living stone. It was old and clearly abandoned, but even after 3 centuries, the Vanti engineering held firm, and when Una helped Cerise through the main entrance, she felt a change in the air quality that told her the environmental systems were still partially functional. There should be emergency power in the lower levels, Cerise said, and their voice carried a strange mix of wonder and sadness as they looked around at the abandoned corridors. I never thought I would see this place. My parents told me stories about the old outposts, but I was born after we sealed them away. Una found a power junction, and after some experimentation managed to restore basic lighting to the main chamber, and the soft blue glow that filled the space was gentle enough not to attract attention from outside, but bright enough to let her finally see where they were. The outpost was larger than she had expected, multiple rooms branching off from a central hub with equipment she did not recognize lining the walls and data terminals that flickered with ancient symbols. This was a military installation, Cerise explained as Una helped them to a more comfortable position against one of the walls. Part of the defense network that maintained the creatures in the deep caves. Maintained them? You mean this was intentional? Yes and no, Cerise said. The creatures were created as guardians, but their original purpose was not what I told you earlier. I was not entirely honest with you, Una, and I think you deserve the truth now. Una sat down across from the alien and waited because she had learned that patience was often more valuable than questions. When someone was preparing to share something difficult, the Vanti did not go into hiding by choice. Cerise began. And the creatures were not made by my ancestors. They were made by other species and seeded on our original homeworld as a form of punishment. Punishment for what? Cerise's eyes dropped, and their shimmer seemed to dim as they continued. Long before the current age of the Concord, there was another galactic order, and my people were among its most feared members. The Vanti were conquerors. We took what we wanted from other worlds and enslaved the species we encountered, and built an empire on the suffering of millions. Una listened without interrupting as Cerise described the ancient crimes of their ancestors. Wars of aggression and forced relocations and cultural destruction on a scale that made her human. History seemed almost gentle by comparison. Eventually, the other species united against us, and they could not defeat us in open war, so they created the Hunters. Instead, biological weapons designed to target Vanti specifically, and they released them on our worlds, and we had no defense against something that had been engineered to kill us. So your people fled here to escape. We were driven here, Cerise corrected. The other species wanted us to suffer slowly rather than die quickly, and this world became our prison, hostile enough to keep us contained, but survivable enough that we could not simply choose extinction as an escape. Una was quiet for a long moment as she processed this revelation, and part of her wanted to feel differently about Cerise now that she knew the history of their people, but another part of her, stronger part, understood something important. You were not alive when those things happened, she finally said. Your parents were not alive, and their parents were not alive. 300 years of generations separate you from the people who committed those crimes. The guilt remains, does it? Una asked, or is that just what you have been taught to believe? She stood and walked to one of the data terminals and began trying to access its systems as she continued speaking. My species has done terrible things too, Cerise. We nearly destroyed our own planet and we fought wars that killed hundreds of millions of our own kind, and we enslaved each other based on nothing more than the color of our skin. The terminal responded to her commands and began displaying information that she could not read, but that made Cerise gasp softly. But we are not our ancestors. Yuna continued. Every generation has a choice about what kind of people they want to be, and the sins of the past do not have to define the future. You truly believe that? I have to believe it, Yuna said, because the alternative is that nothing we do matters, and I refuse to live in a universe where that is true. Cerise was silent, and Yuna could see them wrestling with ideas that challenged everything they had been raised to accept, and she knew that kind of internal struggle could not be resolved in a single conversation, but she hoped she had at least planted a seed. The terminal, Cerise said suddenly. What does it show? Yuna looked at the display and then back at Cerise with a question in her eyes. It is the defense system specifications, Cerise explained, and there is something here that might help us, a sonic emitter, designed to repel the hunters. But according to these readings, it requires manual operation. Manual operation meaning what exactly? Meaning someone has to stay here and activate it while the other person escapes. Cerise said, the emitter creates a field that causes intense pain to the creature, but it only covers a limited area and the operator cannot leave until the creature retreats. Yuna studied the diagrams on the screen and her tactical mind immediately began working through the implications. How long would the operator need to stay? Unknown. It depends on how determined the creature is. It could be minutes or it could be hours. And my oxygen supply is down to less than 2 hours. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear, and both of them understood what it meant without having to say it out loud. I will stay, Cerise said. You have done enough for me already, and this is my world and my people's sin. Let me be the one who finally does something right with it. No, Yuna said immediately. You cannot save us both this time, Yuna. The numbers simply do not work. Then we find another way. There is no other way. The sound of clicking echoed from somewhere outside the outpost, distant but unmistakable, and both of them knew that their time for debate was running out. I did not drag you through flooded tunnels and nearly drown myself just to leave you behind now, Yuna said, and there was steel in her voice that surprised even her. So help me think of a solution or I will figure one out myself. Cerise stared at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in their expression, something that looked almost like the beginning of a smile. You really are as strange as the story said. Stranger probably now focus. The clicking grew louder and closer, and in the depths of the abandoned outpost, a human and an alien began working together against impossible odds. The tunnels twisted and branched like the roots of some enormous tree, and Yuna moved through them as quickly as she dared while dragging Cerise behind her on the improvised stretcher, and every sound she made seemed impossibly loud in the pressing darkness. Left here, Cerise whispered, their voice barely audible. Then down through the narrow passage. Yuna followed the directions without question, because trust was all they had now, and doubting her guide would only waste precious time and energy that neither of them could afford to lose. The clicking calls of the hunter echoed through the stone around them, and Yuna had noticed a pattern emerging. The creature was not simply following them in a straight line, but rather moving through parallel tunnels and trying to cut off their escape routes like a predator that understood strategy and patience. It is smart, she muttered as she squeezed through a gap barely wide enough for the stretcher. It was designed to be smart, Cerise replied. My ancestors wanted a guardian that could adapt and learn, and they succeeded far better than they should have. They emerged into a larger chamber, and Yuna paused to catch her breath and check her oxygen levels. 4 hours remaining if she continued at this pace, and less if she had to move faster. The chamber ahead of them was filled with water, dark and still, and stretching from wall to wall with no visible path around it. And when Yuna shone her light across the surface, she could not see the far side, which meant it was either very wide or the passage continued underwater for some distance. "I remember this place," Cerise said, and there was despair in their voice now. "The flooded chamber, it extends for perhaps 50 meters before rising again on the other side. Can you swim?" "No," Cerise admitted. "My species cannot hold our breath for more than 30 seconds. We are not built for water the way your kind is." Yuna stared at the black water and felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, because 50 meters was a long distance to cover underwater, even for a strong swimmer, and doing it while towing an injured alien who could not help themselves seemed nearly impossible. The clicking sound came again from the tunnel behind them, much closer now and accompanied by the scraping of something large moving across stone. "It is almost here," Cerise said. "You should leave me and swim across yourself. You can still survive if you go now." Yuna ignored them and instead began checking her suit systems with quick, efficient movements, and her mind was working through the problem like she had been trained to do, breaking it down into components and finding solutions for each piece. "Your biology," she said. "You said you cannot hold your breath for long, but can you breathe underwater if you have a supply of air?" Yes, I suppose so, but I do not understand." Yuna detached the emergency air bladder from her suit, a backup system designed to provide flotation in liquid environments, and began modifying it with the tools in her kit. "This holds enough air for about 3 minutes of breathing," she explained as she worked. "I am going to rig it so you can take small breaths from it while we cross, and I will hold my own breath for 50 meters. I have trained for worse." Cerise watched her with those strange mirror eyes, and Yuna could see that the alien was trying to understand something fundamental about her, some piece of the puzzle that did not fit into their worldview. "Why are you doing this?" Cerise asked. "You could save yourself right now and no one would ever know that you left me behind. Your colleagues do not even know I exist." Yuna finished her modifications and looked directly into the alien's eyes as she answered. "When I was young, I got lost in a forest near my home. I was only 6 years old, and I wandered away from my family during a hiking trip, and I was alone and terrified as night began to fall." She helped Cerise into the water as she continued speaking, and the cold was shocking, but she forced herself to keep moving. "A stranger found me, a woman I had never met who was out walking her dog, and she could have just pointed me toward the main trail and gone on with her day, but instead she stayed with me for 3 hours until we found the ranger station." They were fully in the water now, and Yuna positioned the air bladder near Cerise's face and showed them how to take small sips of oxygen. I asked her afterward why she helped me, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said that the measure of a person is not what they do when everyone is watching, but what they do when no one will ever know. Cerise was silent for a moment, and then said something that surprised Yuna. "We have no such concept among my people. Individual survival has always been the highest priority." "Then maybe," Yuna said as she prepared to dive, "it is time your people learned something new." She took a deep breath and pulled them both beneath the surface. The water was cold and dark and absolutely silent, and Yuna kicked hard to propel them forward, while her lungs began to burn almost immediately, and she counted the seconds in her head to keep herself calm. 20 seconds, and the darkness was complete around them. 30 seconds, and her muscles screamed for oxygen. 40 seconds, and she could feel Cerise trembling beside her, but the alien was still breathing from the bladder and still alive. 50 seconds, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. 60 seconds, and her hand touched stone ahead of her, a wall that meant either They had reached the other side or they were about to die. She pushed upward with the last of her strength, and her head broke the surface, and she gasped for air that tasted sweeter than anything she had ever breathed before Cerise surfaced beside her and coughed water, but they were breathing and alive, and Yuna dragged them both onto a rocky ledge where they collapsed in a heap of exhausted limbs. "You did it," Cerise whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," Yuna corrected behind them across the flooded chamber. They could hear the creature reaching the water's edge, and its frustrated clicking echoed through the cave as it realized its prey had escaped. But Yuna knew they had only bought themselves time and not safety, because the creature would find another way around and the hunt was not over yet. She checked their oxygen again. 3 hours remaining now. They needed to keep moving. "Cerise," she said, as she helped the alien back onto the stretcher. "Is there anywhere in these caves we could find shelter? Somewhere the creature cannot follow?" Cerise was quiet for a moment, and then said something that made Yuna's heart beat faster. "There is an old outpost about 2 kilometers from here, a place my ancestors built long ago. And if any of its systems still function, we might find something there that could help us. Then that is where we are going." She began to pull the stretcher forward again, and the darkness swallowed them whole. But for the first time since she had fallen into this nightmare, Yuna felt something that might have been hope. The alien woke slowly, and their first instinct was to pull away from the human kneeling beside them, but the movement sent waves of pain through their broken body, and they collapsed back with a sound that needed no translation. "Easy," Yuna said, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you. I am trying to help." Those mirror-bright eyes studied her for a long moment, and Yuna could almost see the calculations happening behind them: threat assessment and risk evaluation, and the desperate mathematics of survival. "Human," the alien finally said, their voice stronger now, but still rough with pain. "I have heard stories about your kind. Good stories, I hope." "Strange stories," the alien replied. "Stories that do not make sense." Yuna almost smiled at that, because she had heard similar things from a dozen different species since humanity joined the galactic community, and it seemed that humans confused everyone equally regardless of their biology or culture. "What is your name?" she asked. "I am Yuna Sergeant Yuna Park of the Galactic Survey Course." The alien hesitated, as if giving their name was a significant decision that required careful thought, and perhaps for their species, it was because Yuna had learned that something as simple as an introduction could carry different weight on different worlds. "Cerise," they finally said. "I am called Cerise." "Cerise, can you tell me what happened to you and what species you are? Because I have to admit, I do not recognize your biology, and I have studied the Concord database extensively." Again, that hesitation, and Yuna watched emotions flicker across the alien's face. Fear and shame, and something that looked almost like grief. "My people are the Vanti," Cerise said, "and you would not find us in any Concord database, because the galaxy believes we have been dead for 300 years. Yuna sat back on her heels as her mind processed that information, and she remembered the stories she had heard during her training, legends about a species that had simply vanished from the galactic stage centuries ago and left behind only ruins and mysteries. "The Vanti extinction," she said slowly. "It was one of the great unsolved disappearances. Entire colonies and homeworlds just empty overnight with no explanation." "We did not go extinct," Cerise said, and there was bitterness in their voice now. "We went into hiding, and this world was supposed to be our sanctuary. Planet too hostile and too remote for anyone else to want, and we have lived here in secret ever since. 300 years of hiding. Why?" Cerise looked away and did not answer that question directly, but instead said, something that made Yuna's blood run cold. You need to understand something. Human, these caves are not safe, and there is something living in the depths below us, and it is the reason my body is broken, and it will be the reason we both die if we do not find a way out. What kind of something? A hunter? Ceres said. A creature that my ancestors created long ago as a defense mechanism, and it is designed to kill anything that enters its territory, and the electromagnetic storm above has awakened it from its dormancy cycle. Yuna processed this information quickly, and her tactical mind was already working on solutions, even as another part of her recoiled from the implications of what Ceres had described. How does it hunt? Sound and heat, Ceres explained. It has no eyes, it does not need them in the eternal darkness of the deep caves, and it uses echolocation to navigate and thermal sensing to locate prey. As if to confirm the alien's words, a sound drifted up from somewhere far below them, a clicking, chittering call that echoed off the stone walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Ceres trembled at the sound, and Yuna understood that this was not just fear, but memory. The creature had already found Ceres once, and the results of that encounter were written on the alien's broken body. We need to move, Yuna said, already assessing Ceres's injuries and calculating how she could transport them. Can you walk? No, Ceres admitted. My legs are damaged, and I cannot put weight on them without falling. Then I will carry you. Ceres stared at her with something like shock in their strange eyes, and Yuna realized that she had just violated some fundamental expectation the alien held about how the universe worked. You cannot mean that, Ceres said. The logical choice is to leave me behind and save yourself. I am injured, and I will slow you down, and the creature will catch us both if you try to bring me with you. I am not leaving you. Why not? You do not know me, and you owe me nothing, and your survival chances are significantly higher without me weighing you down. Yuna began stripping off non-essential equipment from her suit and fashioning it into a makeshift stretcher as she answered without looking up from her work. Where I come from, we do not leave people behind, not ever. That is irrational. Maybe, Yuna agreed. But it is also human. She finished the stretcher and helped Ceres onto it as gently as she could, while the alien watched her with an expression of complete bewilderment, and that clicking call came again from the depths closer, now and more insistent. There must be another way out of these caves, Yuna said as she tested the weight of the stretcher. You said your people lived on this world for 300 years, so you must know the tunnel system. I do, Ceres admitted. But the paths have changed over time, and I cannot guarantee that my memories are accurate. Inaccurate guidance is better than wandering blind. Which way? Ceres pointed toward a passage on the far side of the chamber, and Yuna began to drag them toward it with steady, determined steps, and behind them in the darkness, something massive began to move. The hunt had begun. The sky turned green 3 hours before the storm hit, and Sergeant Yuna Park knew they were in trouble the moment she saw that sickly color spreading across the horizon, like a bruise forming on pale skin. She had seen storms on 12 different worlds during her 5 years with the Galactic Survey Corps, but nothing compared to what was building over the mountains of Kepler 442b. And the readings on her scanner confirmed what her gut already told her. They needed to find shelter immediately. We must return to the shuttle, said Velix, the Velith geologist, his compound eyes clicking as they processed the same atmospheric data that Yuna was reading on her device. The shuttle is 9 kilometers away, Yuna replied, already scanning the rocky terrain for options. We will never make it in time. Beside them, Mora the drone biologist trembled slightly as her empathic senses picked up the raw electromagnetic energy building in the atmosphere, and her blue-green skin had turned pale with anxiety. There, Yuna pointed toward a dark opening in the cliff face about 200 meters to their east. That cave system, we can wait out the storm underground. Felix made a clicking sound that indicated reluctance among his species, but he did not argue, because the first bolt of lightning struck the ground less than a kilometer away, and the sound that followed was like nothing any of them had ever heard. Deep rumbling that seemed to shake the very bones of the planet. They ran. Yuna kept herself. Between her two alien colleagues and the storm, her training kicking in automatically as she guided them toward the cave entrance, and the wind had already begun to howl with such force that she had to lean forward. Just to keep moving, the cave mouth swallowed them whole, and the sudden darkness was disorienting after the flickering green light of the storm outside, but Yuna activated her helmet lamp and pressed forward. Knowing that the entrance alone would not protect them from what was coming. "We need to go deeper," she said. "Electromagnetic storms on this planet can send current through surface rock. We need at least 50 meters of stone above us." Mora whimpered softly, but followed as Yuna led them down a sloping passage that wound into the depths of the cliff, and the air grew cooler with each step while the sounds of the storm faded to a distant rumble. They had descended perhaps 40 meters, when the ground beneath Yuna's feet simply disappeared. She fell. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like forever as she tumbled through darkness and her body struck rock and dirt and more rock, before she finally slammed into a hard surface that knocked the breath from her lungs and sent her helmet spinning away into the void. For a long moment she lay still and waited for the pain to tell her how badly she was injured. Her left arm screamed when she tried to move it, possibly fractured or at least badly bruised, and her ribs ached with every breath, but nothing felt broken beyond repair, and she could still move her legs, which meant her spine was intact. "Felix," she called into the darkness. "Mora," her voice echoed off unseen walls and returned to her empty and alone. She found her helmet a few meters away by crawling toward its fading light, and when she put it back on, she saw that the communication system was dead fried by the electromagnetic interference from the storm, or damaged in her fall, or both. Looking up, she could see nothing but blackness where she had fallen from, and when she called again, there was no response, and she understood with cold certainty that the passage had collapsed behind her. She was trapped. Yuna took a slow breath and forced herself to think clearly, because panic was the enemy now, and she had not survived 5 years on alien worlds by giving in to fear. Her suit was still mostly functional, and the life support system showed she had about 6 hours of oxygen remaining if she stayed calm and did not exert herself too much, and her emergency beacon was broadcasting, but whether anyone could receive it through the storm and all this rock was another question entirely. She began to explore her prison. The chamber she had fallen into was larger than she expected, perhaps 30 meters across, with a ceiling she could not see even with her lamp at full power, and the walls were rough natural stone with no obvious exits at ground level. But there was something else in here with her. She heard it first, a soft scraping sound like something being dragged across rock, and she froze with her hand moving automatically to the sidearm at her hip. "Who is there?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear that had begun to crawl up her spine. Silence answered her. Then the scraping came again, closer this time, and Yuna turned her lamp toward the sound. The beam illuminated a figure huddled against the far wall, humanoid in basic shape, but clearly alien, with skin that seemed to shimmer between silver and pale blue, and large dark eyes that reflected her light like mirrors in the void. The alien was injured, and badly so from what Yuna could see as she approached slowly with her weapon drawn, and there was a dark fluid that might have been blood pooling beneath them, and one of their limbs was bent at an angle that suggested it was broken. The creature's eyes tracked her movement, but they made no attempt to flee or attack, and when Yuna was close enough to see their face clearly, she noticed something that made her pause, an expression she recognized despite All the differences between their species, fear mixed with desperate hope. The alien opened their mouth and spoke in a voice that was weak and trembling, but somehow still clear. "You are not supposed to be here," they said in broken galactic common, the trade language of the Concord. "None of us are." Then their eyes rolled back and they collapsed against the stone, and Una found herself standing over an unconscious alien of a species she had never seen. In any database or training manual, she should have been thinking about her own survival and her limited oxygen and the storm raging above and impossibility of escape. Instead, she found herself kneeling beside the stranger and checking their vital signs as best she could, and wondering what kind of horror had left them so broken in this dark place. And somewhere deeper in the cave far below, where even her light could reach, something moved in response to the new sounds that had disturbed its ancient sleep. Something hungry, something that had been waiting a very long time for prey to wander into its domain. Una did not hear it yet, but she would.